I'm Mike Hixson from Graham Church, and that really is one of the main questions of all of Scripture. You can trace that question from cover to cover in the Bible. Where is my satisfaction, and what is it that makes me content? The Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4 writes, I have learned in every situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I think right now, as we're approaching a month into the COVID crisis, a lot of us are beginning to struggle with this issue of contentment, and it's worth going to Scripture and thinking about this. So, contentment is part of the big story of the Bible, and it's a part of the big story of your life, because when you find this secret that the Apostle Paul found, you will be ready to face whatever comes into your life. So what is it that Paul discovers? He says, I found contentment. Well, you need to know the context of the passage. The Philippian church had been supporting Paul financially for a long time, and then they stopped. We don't know if the mail service was bad or they didn't have enough money to send Paul, but for some reason they stopped sending him money, and then he receives a letter from them with financial support, and he writes back to them and said, I am so happy that you wrote me, and I want you to know that the thing that makes me happiest is just to hear from you. It's not the money. Money isn't the issue, because I'm content in whatever comes into my life. Is that the kind of attitude you have? So what is it that Paul found out about contentment? Well, he found out, first of all, that it's not about circumstances. Paul says, my contentment is not based on what happens to me. It's a heart matter. Paul says, it's the way you can tell if you have the real contentment is how you handle plenty and want. If you're content, it doesn't matter whether you have a lot or whether you have a little. There's this king who had a mysterious malady, according to the story, some kind of illness, and he was told that he would only be cured if he could put on the shirt of a content man. So they searched throughout the kingdom trying to find someone who was really content, and they finally found this guy. He was really happy. The problem was he didn't own a shirt. Contentment isn't based on your circumstances. So Paul is saying, I would have been quite satisfied if you hadn't sent me the gift of money, but since you have, I rejoice. I found my contentment in Jesus Christ. He is enough for me. So Paul's teaching us that contentment isn't about circumstances. He also teaches us, second, that joy hangs out with it. And that really is a key to this book of Philippians, is that joy and contentment are kissing cousins. After all, Philippians is a jail letter, and it's a book full of joy. Chapter 1, verse 4, I pray with joy. 1:18, when people slander Paul, he rejoices because the gospel is proclaimed. 1:25, you progress in joy. 1:26, joy overflows. Chapter 2, verse 2, Paul's joy is becoming complete. 2:17, I am glad and rejoice. 3:1, I rejoice in the Lord. So, chapter 4, verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. So again and again, Paul is tying this idea of contentment with joy. And he's saying, I can do all things that need to be done in these circumstances because I have joy in the Lord. So contentment isn't based on my circumstances. It's tied to joy, and it's something you can learn. You can learn contentment. That's this word secret. And Paul is saying, any ability I have to handle all things comes through Jesus Christ. And so what Paul learned ultimately was more about God than himself. Some people say, I can do all things through education. Some say I can do all things through money. I can do all things through power. I can do all things through positive self-imaging. I can do all things through confidence in myself. But For Paul, it really wasn't all that important how his circumstances worked out, because he knew that through Christ he could handle anything. Christ had taught him that. Paul held on to Jesus so tightly that he could drop everything else if God asked him to. So contentment is something you can learn. If you don't have it, it's something you can find. And then finally, contentment's something I've got to work at. Jeremiah Burroughs was a Puritan back in the 17th century in London, and he wrote a fabulous little book called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. And he says about Philippians 4:11 that to be well skilled in the mastery of Christian contentment is the duty, the glory, and the excellence of a Christian. Why is it a secret? Paul didn't know it before, but he does now. And so when Paul uses this word secret, he's using a very important word. He's using a word that shows that it's not something that everybody has. It's something that people want to have. It's something that's not easy to find, but he's pointing to something that we can find in Jesus Christ. Something that we know about, but we don't always know how to find. It's something we all feel, but we don't know the key to it. So what is contentment? In short, it's a disposition of the heart that joyfully submits to God and delights in Him. We'll come back to this in the future and explore it some more. Thank you for joining us.